Well, Travis, thank you for joining us. On this little film you see, each light on the screen is a city where Uber is now operating. Over 450 cities in 72 countries, racking up 2 billion miles every single month. And 7 years ago, that screen would have been blank. It's a remarkable achievement, and how do you feel about this right now, where Uber is?
Well, look, the way I like to describe doing the Uber thing is, it's kind of like driving a car. You're going down the highway at a pretty good clip, pretty fast, and then all of a sudden it becomes foggy. Mm-hmm. And you sort of grab onto the steering wheel a little bit tighter. Maybe a little bead of sweat comes down. You don't have time to look back, and you can only see so far ahead. And so it's hard to imagine, it was super hard to imagine way back then what it would become, and we still haven't really taken the time to look back and say, wow. And it's just as crazy to think about what could happen in the future.
Don't you have a statement of new statistics you're prepared to make right now?
I mean, we've got a lot of statistics. I think we have, somewhere around 40 million monthly active riders. Those are paying riders. Drivers making about, I think in the last month, it was somewhere between $1.5 and $2 billion that they got paid in a single month. And, so you think about it, 40 million monthly active riders, paying somewhere in the neck of the woods of $50 a month. It's just been a pretty substantial and wild ride, but one in which, supporting millions of drivers that 5-6 years ago, they were either underemployed or unemployed. It's pretty interesting.
You probably get asked this all the time, but how did you get here? I mean, to here.
Oh, I took an Uber.
You made it just under the wire. Was the car there on time?
The car's there on time.
Okay.
I was taking my time.
Okay.
Way over.
Okay. Do you drive a car?
I don't. I have a car in my garage, and two things have happened. One, the alternator belt is broken, okay. And two, my driver's license is expired.
You're not a car guy.
I used to be. I grew up in LA.
Okay.
So it's hard to be in LA and not be a car guy.
What was your first car?
My first car was a Nissan Sentra 1986 that I bought for $1,200.
Okay, that says something. Okay.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
it was white,
your new headquarters,
I thought it was gray.
And then your new headquarters, I heard that you have 450 parking spaces. Shouldn't everybody be taking Uber to work and back?
Well, look, sometimes I like to say being Uber means being efficient, but sometimes that means not taking an Uber. Okay. Doesn't mean that we're the solution for everything in the world. We try to be, but we're not.
Well, we've talked a bit about the change in your logo, because I thought you had a brilliant logo when you first started. Can we just put it up on the screen? And you have very definite opinions of what happened and why you changed it.
I mean, clearly the right one is better.
Yeah, okay. I think the left one is better, but yeah.
That's okay. Look, I think people get attached to the old, especially when I think the first time you use Uber, it's that experience where you pushed a button and a car appeared. And there can be an attachment. This is the thing you tap every day. But the way we feel about it, well, look, the one on the left here was made in 2011. I mean, there was one before it, which was a red U magnet looking thing and a a C magnet, the same thing just turned on its side, and that stood for Uber Cab. Mm-hmm. And we changed it to that. And when we changed it to that, we got so much hate. That icon you love, you know how much hate we got when we introduced that one?
The first one. The
first one. And so we did that in 2011. We were in 2 cities, San Francisco and New York. And we only did black car service, so it was super high-end. This was meant to be kind of like a badge that might be on a luxury car. But what had happened was we went from this sort of luxury service that was in 2 cities to being in 400, 500 cities around the world, 70-plus countries, and also not high-end anymore, but something that was more populous, more of the people, for the people kind of thing. And that thing on the left doesn't say that.
The thing on the right looks like a pharmaceutical company, though, to me.
Well, look,
Like an eyewear company or something like that.
with
there-
expansion opportunities.
Those are supposed to be roads, I take it, or
Well, no. So what we have is
Or
we
veins.
have. Next question. I'll riff and we'll go, but then
Okay.
we'll spend the entire time doing that.
no, we're not going to. But the thing in the middle, is that the car and then the
No.
road? Okay.
All right, you asked for it. Here we go. Look, the way we think about where Uber sits is we sit sort of in the middle between bits and atoms. That black box, or that box you see in the middle there, is we think of the square as sort of it's an icon for us of the bit, is software, technology, automation. The circle is atoms. The line that connects to that dark box is your journey. Now, the pattern that you see behind it, actually, if you go to different countries and install the app in different countries, you get a different pattern. What we try to do is localize the pattern so that it feels local.
Okay.
Now, it's not the perfect implementation, but we're moving fast, and so we put something out there. And I promise you, you'll see over time, this gets better and tighter over time. I've got some things in my, up my sleeve that I think you'll actually like. But stand by.
So the brilliance about Uber was, and it was brilliant, is not having the cars. But by doing driverless cars, aren't you going into the car business in a certain way?
Who says we're going to own all of them?
So what, the Uber drivers who drive now will have that little thing on top, and
Well, I think there's all kinds of implementations, whether it be folks who own fleets. The drivers might even own cars that then get converted to being driverless, and they make an income off of it or a revenue of some kind. And it's possible we could own them. I think there's a lot of different models for how this is going to work, and I don't think anybody has a clear sort of definitive idea of exactly how it's going to go. But when you talk about when that transition happens, let's say that transition happens over 10 or 15 years, you're talking about replacing 80 million cars in the US, 100 million cars, something like that. I mean, it's going to be a huge, huge number of vehicles that when you multiply by 20,000 or 30,000 or $40,000 per vehicle, you're literally talking about hundreds of billions of dollars a year.
okay, you're zipping down the highway at 60 miles an hour, and the grid goes out. What happens then?
The cars will be able to drive, they'll just be able to drive.
But what happens if you're sitting in the back seat,
Yes.
and the steering wheel's in the front seat?
Well, who says there's going to be a steering wheel?
Well, you got to control it if the grid goes down. Don't
Well,
you?
no, what grid are you talking about?
The electrical. Okay, the electrical
You're
grid.
going old school on me. What is this? Look, I think you make sure these things operate, even if the sun isn't shining, or if the electricity has a little hiccup.
You take them, right?
There are batteries in these cars.
Okay.
They run.
Okay.
They do their thing.
But you take the driverless cars back and forth places? Because I know you have them in the city here. We saw one the other day.
So there's a few cruising around here in SF. They're doing some mapping and just seeing how things operate here in the city. We have driverless Ubers taking passengers around in Pittsburgh, which is where our Advanced Technology Center is sort of based. And we, so you can push a button and then a driverless Uber comes up. Of course, it has a safety driver there too. And it's a lot of fun. And you can see when the driver is driving the car, you see in the back there's this iPad sort of visualization, and you can see the car sort of on a Google Map sort of doing its thing. And when the software is driving the car, you see what the software sees. And so it's the digitization of the physical world is what the software sees, and to expose that to the passenger is a really fun and interesting moment. And sort of, we are starting to enter the future.
Are you having trouble getting people to be early adapters to this, or
no,
other than the novelty of it and be able to tell your friends?
I mean, a lot of folks feel like it's smoother and better than a human driver, at least in the parts where it's able to go. So these cars cannot go everywhere.
You mean they're mostly urban?
Well, not only urban, but they can handle certain urban environments, and then certain urban environments they can't.
Like New York, say?
Well, no, it just depends. For instance, if there's not a lot of pedestrians, really wide roads, no oncoming traffic, that's going to be, and no weather, that's going to be easier than narrow roads, lots of pedestrians, unprotected left-hand turns, you know, and there's a number of other sort of complexities that can determine whether a self-driving Uber is capable to be self-driving or not. Now, ultimately, you want to get to a place where there are certain routes and certain places where it can just do its own thing, and it can do it safer than a human can. But that's just a matter of time, and it's going to take a certain amount of time to not just make that possible somewhere, but to make that possible in most places is going to take years, if not, you know, a decade or more.
And I assume they'll be exponentially better 3 years from now than they are right now.
Of course, yes.
Now,
and the question, though, is that the progress sort of gets asymptotic at some point, and you hope that the asymptote happens after it gets better than a human driver. But nobody knows for sure yet, and that's the science and engineering that's going on right now.
Now, congestion and pollution are a big part of your company in trying to reduce that. How has that gone so far? Is there anything quantifiable?
Well, look, so Uber Pool is a big effort that we started a couple years ago along these lines. You know, those who have Uber Pool know, but I think there's still a lot of folks who don't know. You push a button, car comes just like it did before. You open the door, you get in the car, except now there's somebody else already in the car.
Some weird guy already in the car.
There's an awesome person in your community that you can have a great conversation with. And it's because two people are taking a similar ride at the same time.
Okay.
The more popular the system gets, the more likely that kind of scenario happens. And the more that happens, well, the lower the price gets, and the lower the price gets, the more people do it because they can afford it. And so right now, 20% of all Uber rides globally are Uber Pool rides. And that means we went from a situation where there are two people in two separate cars to two people in one car. In fact, we have triple and quadruple matches often. So it can be, you're taking 3 or 4 cars off the road. And for the driver, it's amazing because they pick somebody up, they pick somebody else up, they drop somebody off, they pick somebody else up. They can have these sort of what I call perpetual rides, where they're making money for an entire hour and sometimes hours at a time, getting very efficient use of their vehicle, their asset. And we're saving, we're really reducing traffic, we're really reducing pollution. I mean, it's just better for cities.
I mean, speaking for myself and my family, we've only had really nice experiences with Uber drivers. But there are these things, there's elements out there that say that you should have more background checks for some of the drivers. And why are you against that?
Well, look, we do background checks for all drivers. I mean,
like criminal records and that
of
sort of
course.
thing? Oh, you do, okay.
So what you see, though, is like you'll get these really interesting debates in cities about fingerprints.
Yes.
What happens is there's a system called LiveScan, which taps into an FBI database, which tracks arrests, but not convictions. So if you've been arrested in this country, but not convicted, you now can't get work. And I view that as unjust.
That's the ban the box thing?
Well, that's the ban the box thing, but it's just about what it means to be arrested in this country right now, and sort of the ramifications. And I think there's some criminal justice issues with sort of that kind of system being pushed. Do we want to know who are the folks who have committed some kind of crime that makes them unsafe? Absolutely. And in fact, what we do instead is way harder. When somebody applies to be an Uber driver, we go to every county that they've ever been in, lived in, and we physically have somebody go to the county courthouse and pull the records. That's way harder than sort of tapping into some database. But the problem is that database is fundamentally unjust, and it's just not right. No.
Now, where do you see Uber in, say, 5 years from now? Because it's gone from 0 to this in 7. I mean, are there Ubers? I know people who say, this is the Uber of grocery delivery, or this is the Uber of toothpaste, but you're sort of the Uber of everything, and you're at least in the future, I assume.
No. Well, look, it's sort of with that analogy, it's a little foggy. You can't see everything that's going to happen in 5 years, but really, when you start to automate, you start to do the self-driving thing, on our roads. The roads in many ways are sort of the cardiovascular system for a city. You make it, of course, much more efficient cardiovascular system, but these cars, when they go into self-driving, you're now starting to enter, you're starting to become a robotics company in some ways. And so I think we're at the very beginning stages of becoming a robotics company.
Is most of your research done at your place or with affiliations with universities like, say, Carnegie Mellon or?
Well, look, we have hundreds of scientists working on, our hardest problems, self-driving being number one. But yeah, I mean, we partner with universities. We look for, some of the top professors, top scientists out there to sort of solve these super hard problems. And I think what's happening now, because of how innovation's working and how fast it's coming, is that, it used to be that you go into academic world and you work on something and then, 20 years later it might become a thing. Things are happening a lot faster. And because of that, tech companies have to be able to do engineering and science at the same time. And I think that's a shift that a lot of the sort of biggest tech companies are seeing right now, that science is not just this lab where you have some cool new ideas and it's fun to show it off. The science is actually part of the core product development, because things are happening so fast that you need science to be part of that overall product effort that's happening today, and merging engineering and science.
I mean, do you feel that your competition is no longer Lyft, but Google and Apple in this respect?
Well, I mean, certainly as we move towards the future, autonomy is a pretty critical thing for us. I mean, it's existential. It's of course, I mean, autonomy, of course, is it will be amazing for cities in many ways. Let's just start with the 1.3 million people that die every year in cars, and the tens of millions of people that are seriously injured every year. And then think about what's on your, what's on the I was going to say homepage, but what's on the front page of any newspaper, the things we worry about. How many of them compare to 1.3 million random deaths a year, right? Not a lot. And so helping to make cities just substantially safer is a big deal, but because everything's going to be more efficient and because the price point comes down so far, transportation becomes accessible to everybody.
Now, one thing is, while you were building this company, you got a reputation of being slightly combative because you sort of, in each area where you open. What were you like as a kid? You still look sort of like a kid. I can sort of see the 8-year-old you.
The people who know me know I'm pretty much the same.
Okay, combative or?
Well, look, like I could tell you some funny stories from when I was a kid, but I was, sort of the straight A student, but also a little bit of like looking for, debating my parents all the time, trying to find when they were not logically correct. This kind of kid. Yeah. Not always the most likable kid, but it comes from a good place.
And so I'm always interested in somebody's average day. So what's your average day? You wake up with an alarm clock or the light or what?
So I'm sleeping more now since Ariana joined the board. You got to keep the phone away from the bed, otherwise that doesn't happen.
Yeah. Ariana Huffington.
Yeah. So.
Oh, they were just talking about some random Ariana person. Okay.
That's funny. So, what happened? I guess my day is different all the time. I guess the way to describe how I organize my work is my management style is what I call problem solver in chief. And what that means is the biggest, most impactful problems or opportunities that are not getting solved, well, I jump in. And those can change all the time. But that's my list. My list is the top things that need to be solved today. And I go in and help move those things forward. Now, sometimes solving a problem can take weeks. Sometimes it can take months. But it changes. So like once something gets solved or we find somebody else that can solve it, then I turn my attention to the things that aren't being solved.
But have you read the papers before you go in and had a cup of coffee and breakfast and
No.
exercise? No, you just wake up and go in.
I wake up and just start.
Like what time?
It depends, but it depends what time I went to bed. So, I mean, I usually leave the office probably 10 or 11 p.m. and usually get into the office about like right around 9 a.m.
Do you have a desk?
Yes.
Do you do your own email and everything like that at the desk?
Yeah.
And so you're sitting at the desk and people come in with the problems. This is not working and that's not working.
Well, like, sometimes they email, sometimes they stop by, but there's certain problems that I'm working on that, like, I know are most strategic things, and I'm keeping up to date on those, and then you just ask a few questions and you can start to see where the problems are that need to be solved.
Are you mechanical?
What do you mean?
I mean, could you like fix a car or a bike or hang a picture or something?
When I was a kid, my dad and I used to fix cars, but my thing is I'm more of a logical engineer versus a mechanical engineer, and that's why computer science for me, electrical engineering was more my thing.
I want to talk about and I always pronounce it incorrectly, it's DD. I always want to say Kaching, but I know it's Chuching, the Chinese company. Yeah. So you tried to, the backstory is, tell a bit about you trying to go into China and what happened there.
So it was beginning of 2013. We thought it would be super interesting and maybe impossible for us to go and do a transportation thing, roll out like we do in all cities in China. And China is just so different than the rest of the world. I got my best people, 6 or 7 people, and we camped out in an apartment for a couple weeks and figured it out. And that was early 2013, probably 6 or 7 months later.
In Beijing.
In Beijing. 6 or 7 months later, we launched. And over the time we were there, we invested approximately $2 billion. And recently merged our China operations with Didi, which was our chief competitor in China, for about 20% of Didi.
But aren't you, in dealing with the Chinese, don't you have to make them a partner to do sort of proper commerce in China?
I mean, it depends. I think the better way to think about it is that in China, the government is involved in business, just in many different ways. They're involved in media, they're involved in business, and because of that, that's sort of the 100,000-foot view, but because of that, everything at the 100-foot view changes. And so when you go to China, you have to rethink how you do everything. You have to start from scratch. And in many ways, you have to become Chinese. And if you're not willing to become Chinese, and if you go into China thinking you know how to do something best, you are going to get your ass handed to you. You have to go into China being humble and I'm going to assume everything is different until proven otherwise. And I'm going to understand China all the way down, as deep as I can go, so that I can build the thing back up from the bottom up. And that's how we approached it. And it was a wild, amazing sort of entrepreneurial journey for us and for me personally.
And you're on their board and they're on your board?
Correct.
Have you been to their board meetings yet?
I don't think they've had a single board meeting yet.
Really?
Yeah.
But would you consider that, is that a defeat or a success of the expedition to China?
Well, I mean, it depends what
it is what it is.
Yeah, well, it is what it is. I think it depends how you look at it, right? So we invested $2 billion. You can make the argument, well, it's very clear that it's worth at least 7 right now, but you can make the argument maybe even 10. It depends on how you look at it. But that's a good return in sort of 2 years' time. So yeah, we feel pretty good about about our efforts there, and we feel very good about the partnership we have with Didi in China.
Is Amazon and the way Jeff Bezos has run Amazon, is that a sort of model in the fact that you're not concerned with short-term profits right now? It's about growing your company.
Well, look, we've raised money so that we can invest it and grow the business, geographically as well as across products and technology. So we're going to invest it. We didn't raise money so that we could hoard it. We raised it so that we could invest. And I think that's generally what I guess our investors expect. That's why we did it. We sort of made the plan very clear when we went and raised it. I don't know if the general public totally gets it, but that's what's going on.
But this will be a very anticipated IPO. I mean, when you finally do that, is there a timeline on that?
I mean, those who've heard me answer this question, it's, look, I feel like we're, maybe we just entered high school. We're 6 years old. We just entered high school, like let's call it the 9th grade. It's not time to go to prom just yet.
Okay. So there's been a few, like along the way, there's been a few bumps in the road PR-wise. Do you feel that those were learning experiences? You're a better businessman now than you were, say, 5 years ago?
Look, we believe in always improving and always just becoming a better version of yourself, like finding your potential or aspiring to your potential and always working to get there. So yes, I've personally gotten better as a business person over time. I'm an engineer by training, but also, running Uber. I mean, we haven't done everything perfect. We made mistakes, but we always get back up and we always find a way to learn and to get better.
Is there a model for you that this is the type of businessman I like to be, excluding Steve Jobs, because everybody says that, obviously. But is there somebody who you say, he's just doing it the right way, this business leader? Like a Jeff Bezos.
Well, I think, for us, we don't really aspire to be somebody other than ourselves. And part of being ourselves is sort of reimagining the way things could be done. So we like to take the impossible, we like to take the old way of doing things and just completely change it. That's part of who we are. There are great CEOs, great founders, great leaders out there, and there's something to learn from all of them. In fact, there's something to learn from the ones that aren't great too. Like, again, everybody sees success, they see failure, and we see that personally, and we should learn from it, but why not learn from other people's success and failure? I think, of course, I think Jeff Bezos is an amazing leader. Larry has done incredible things over at Google. Of course, in their leadership teams as well, the obvious examples, there's something to learn from all of them.
And how many people are in your sort of core group?
It depends how you look at it, but when you have sort of this problem-solving culture, the core group sort of depends on the problem that's being solved. And so it's very dynamic what that core group is and on what problem. I have 10, 11 direct reports, and then depending on what the problems of the day are, can determine how many of those folks are in a particular problem. And by the way, a lot of problems getting solved that I'm not involved in. And so figuring out which ones that you go into, how do you prioritize it, how do you get to the future faster is one of the things we spend a lot of time sort of architecting so that Uber endures as a company long into the future.
We opened the summit with a discussion about Silicon Valley and sort of the state of Silicon Valley. Do you think it's at a high point of invention right now, or at a plateau, or at a low point, or
I think there's
jumping off?
Yeah, it's funny. It reminds me, look, I've been an entrepreneur since the late 90s. And I remember in 2001, I was raising money. I was raising money in the fall of 2001 for a networking software company. And I remember going to one of the restaurants in Palo Alto, which used to be bustling, and you'd have to book, get a reservation a month ahead of time or something, and it was empty. It was like tumbleweeds. And I remember a VC telling me that all the things that could be invented, this is 2001, all the things that could be invented in software had been invented, and that there was no more innovation left in software. And so that there's irrational exuberance and irrational pessimism. I'm just generally an innovation optimist. I just think there's just problems to be solved everywhere, and once you solve them, you already see what's, I like to say boredom is only the result of a lack of imagination. And, the minute you solve one thing, you just sit down for a few minutes and then you come up with 10 more ideas. So So I think I'm an optimist, like there's just so much more to do. I think what's very interesting, and maybe this is because of our global reach and just where we've been, is Silicon Valley, I think, has been sort of the North Star for innovation or the hub of innovation globally. And I think that is no longer going to be a thing. I think if we go 5 years out, you're going to start to see hubs of innovation. And I know you go to any city and they're like, we're a hub too. But this is about to be real, at least with a couple major ones, right? So I like to say that, you know, look, we want to be where the action is. I think it's going to go to other places. I like to say that there are going to be at least 3 hubs of innovation in the next 5 years.
In the United States?
In 5-10 years. No, I'm talking about globally.
Okay.
I like to call it the 3 bays. There's the Bay Area, there's Beijing, and there's Bangalore. And you watch Beijing in 5 years, 5-ish years, there's going to be as much innovation coming out of there as there is here. And that means that folks who are in the innovation thing, like that's what we do, you better start spending time in China.
Do you still?
Of course, yes.
Yeah, no, it's funny because Kleenex and Xerox always objected to the fact that their products or their company names were used as nouns. Does it bother you or delight you that Uber is basically a verb?
I mean, that's cool.
Yeah, you like it.
That's kind of cool, right?
Is there a company out there that you wish you'd invented yourself that's in say in the last 7 years?
Not really.
Really? Okay. Okay, so we'll talk about Auto, which is the self-driving truck.
Yeah.
If that works, there's like 3.5 million truck drivers in this country. You put them out of work, you got the Teamsters on your back. And that strikes me as a very precarious road to drive.
Well, look, again, I think people maybe misunderstand how this kind of technology is going to roll out. It's going to take quite a while before those trucks are autonomous all the places they need to go.
It's like 2 real trucks and 1 autonomous truck.
Yeah, or you could imagine a situation where, okay, it can drive the highways autonomously, but what happens when it gets off the highway and they got to back into a distribution center, right? There's just so many corner cases that I don't think you can really count on autonomy getting there in short order. But on the highways, it's amazing. Now imagine if you own that truck, which a lot of these truckers do, and now they can relax for a large portion of the trip. I mean, it changes the quality of their life. And of course, the safety aspect is a big deal as well. And I think that's sort of what we're going to see in the near term as these technologies start to roll out. I mean,
aviation experts say you can have basically a self-flying airplane. And that's something I think they're going to have trouble with early adapters on. I'm not sure you want to be 35,000 feet in the air, as they say, when the grid goes out,
Yeah.
Would you fly in a self-flying airplane?
If it's proven to be safer than a plane that's flown by somebody else, right? As long as it hits certain safety standards, why not?
I'm just going to ask you one more question because our time is up. You're worth a lot of money now. What's the most expensive thing you've bought?
Well, I think what a lot of people don't know is that I've never sold a single Uber share. So the most expensive thing I bought before Uber started, and it's my home. And it was right around $1 million.
Okay.
So I got a mortgage.
You still have a mortgage?
Yeah.
Amazing. Fabulous. Thank you so much, Travis.
Okay.
Well done.
I grew up in LA.
Okay.
So it's hard to be in LA and not be a car guy.
What was your first car?
My first car was a Nissan Sentra 1986 that I bought for $1,200.
Okay, that says something. Okay.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
it was
in
white,
your new
but
headquarters,
I thought it was gray.
In your new headquarters, I heard that you have 450 parking spaces. Shouldn't everybody be taking Uber to work and back?
Well, look, sometimes I like to say being Uber means being efficient, but sometimes that means not taking an Uber.
Okay.
Doesn't mean that we're the solution for everything in the world. We try to be, but we're not.
Well, we've talked a bit about the change in your logo because I thought you had a brilliant.
Pretty fast, and then all of a sudden it becomes foggy. And you sort of grab onto the steering wheel a little bit tighter. Maybe a little bead of sweat comes down. You don't have time to look back, and you can only see so far ahead. And so it's hard to imagine, it was super hard to imagine way back then what it would become, and we still haven't really taken the time to look back and say, wow. And it's just as crazy to think about what could happen in the future.
Don't you have a statement of new statistics you're prepared to make right now?
I mean, we've got a lot of statistics. I think we have, somewhere around 40 million monthly active riders. Those are paying riders. Drivers making about, I think in the last month, it was somewhere between $1.5 and $2 billion that they got paid in a single month. And, so you think about it, 40 million monthly active riders, paying somewhere in the neck of the woods of $50 a month. It's just been a pretty substantial and wild ride, but one in which, supporting millions of drivers that 5-6.
Well, Travis, thank you for joining us. On this little film you see, each light on the screen is a city where Uber is now operating. Over 450 cities in 72 countries, racking up 2 billion miles every single month. And 7 years ago, that screen would have been blank. It's a remarkable achievement, and how do you feel about this right now, where Uber is?
Well, look, the way I like to describe doing the Uber thing is, it's kind of like driving a car. You're going down the highway at a pretty good clip. Years ago, they were either underemployed or unemployed. It's pretty interesting.
You probably get asked this all the time, but how did you get here? I mean, to here.
Oh, I took an Uber.
You made it just under the wire. Was the car there on time?
The car's there on time.
Okay.
I was taking my time.
Okay.
On the way over.
Okay. Do you drive a car?
I don't. I have a car in my garage, and two things have happened. One, the alternator belt is broken,
Okay.
and two, my driver's license is expired.
You're not a car guy.
I used to be.